Okay, so I stuck my neck out of the window on the main show and said Erik Ten Hag will be fired by the time we sit together again. Yeah, that's what happened. Simon Rolf is, what did I say? He will smile in the smile and talk into the microphones while the lawyers write up the documents to get Erik Ten Hag out of the club. It's probably exactly what happened here. Leverkusen are getting some grief for this, but I actually, I also noted a lot of applause for recognizing early on that this wasn't a good idea. This isn't a good fit. And we've seen this time and time again with Bundesliga teams that, trying to sit out a situation that is obviously bad. Dortmund with Nuri Sahin come to mind last year, where very early on was very, very apparent that this wasn't going to work out. Leverkusen didn't get themselves into that situation. They cut the ties. Erik Ten Hag, with a Instagram social media post where he acted surprised. I don't know how he can be surprised given the nature of the business and where things were. Stefan, you were with Leverkusen, not in Leverkusen, but with Leverkusen on the weekend. Just some thoughts here.
Yeah, I can only echo what we said in the main show in terms of, reading between the lines and certainly speaking to people on the ground on Saturday. There was a lot of kind of frustration as to what's happened. Like I said, on that main show, Leverkusen, I think the way I described them was they're like a kind of Wall Street bank. They're not a family-friendly club. I mean, technically they're a family-friendly club, don't get me wrong, but like the way that they do their business, the boardroom, behind closed doors, very cutthroat when they have to be, with players as well as managers, which we've seen in this window. And I definitely got the impression, speaking to people at the club on Saturday after the game against Werder Bremen, that a lot of people weren't happy. Having said that, Manu, I don't think Erik Ten Hag has been sacked because he only picked up, 1 point from his first 2 games in the Bundesliga.
He won the pokal, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think he's been sacked because they lost to a youth team in Brazil. I think he's been sacked because, and maybe this is what explains his somewhat surprise, at least apparent surprise on social media, is that clearly something happened in the summer transfer window. Something clearly happened between all these players coming and going, where Leverkusen realized that Ten Hag wasn't the guy that was going to help them deal with a real unprecedented turnover of players, and perhaps wasn't the guy who was going to fit in with what Leverkusen have always been, is a club that sell players when they hit their peak and then bring in younger players to develop them. Maybe not to the same kind of industrial scale as like an RB Leipzig, although the summer would suggest otherwise. But I think, I'll go all the way back to when Xabi Alonso announced he was leaving the club, and I reported at the time that when I spoke to someone at the club, they said, we can finally get back to doing business in the transfer window the way that we want to do it, because obviously Xabi Alonso had strict demands. He wanted ready-made players, and that won him a league title. Leverkusen aren't a club that wanted to kind of extend that. I know it's silly to say, because why wouldn't you want to keep winning league titles? But they couldn't just keep signing players who are 27, 28, 29 years old. And they obviously want to make big changes, which they did. Now, on paper, I think Ten Hag would have been the perfect guy for that because, while he had problems at Manchester United, he still developed young players there. While his record at Ajax was solid, albeit maybe not as good as some suggested, he still had a great record of developing young players there. And of course, at Bayern Munich before that, he was a youth coach. So I think it made sense that he was coming to a club where they had a lot of young players. Stuff obviously kind of got, wires obviously got mixed up, or different signals or whatever you want to refer to it, in the summer transfer window. And there was obviously some huge disagreement, or there was obviously something that happened off the field that made it clear that Ten Hag and the business model that Leverkusen wanted to return to just wasn't going to be a good fit. I'm sure we'll find out in time. I haven't had a chance to speak to anyone at Leverkusen about this, so if I do find out more, I'll definitely mention it on this podcast. But I don't think he's been sacked because he drew to Werder Bremen. I just don't buy that. So I think definitely something's happened off the field here, Manu.
I was told that the decision to sack Erik Ten Hag was independent from the result on the weekend.
Oh yeah, there we go.
That is very telling. I think the decision was already made even before then. I don't know what the disagreements were, but there were things that the club bosses and then didn't feel the chemistry was there. They didn't think that he fit the culture of the club. He didn't think that the communication between him and the club bosses was as they wanted it to be. And the players didn't like it.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean,
So.
it's again, to go back to what we said in the main show, Mark Tillman came out and he looked like a broken man after that game. Presumably, from what he then told us, what had been said in the changing room, it could be something like that, where Leverkusen can turn around and say, hey, look, we're not the kind of club that chastise young players when they don't play well. We're the kind of club that develop talent. We're very good at it. And, Ten Hag's coming to Leverkusen with the clear intent of trying to rebuild his reputation in terms of short-term success, then you can understand why Leverkusen might turn around and say, hey, look, we know this squad aren't going to be good for the next 3 or 4 months. You have to learn to deal with that. And I think it's worth pointing out that, I did say this at the time, and I've said it throughout his time at Manchester United, Ten Hag doesn't have the best kind of media persona. He doesn't come across as a particularly charming guy. He doesn't, I think I said to someone at the time, he's like Louis van Gaal without the trophies, so he just comes across as quite stubborn, quite cold. He can't kind of walk off remarks and arguments and stuff very well. And maybe that filters through to the way that he deals with these squads and these players. And, if that's an issue, then I can understand why they obviously made the decision to move on from him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we said some of those things on the main show too. I'm not going to repeat what I think, about his personality. Personally think Erik Ten Hag is a good coach, and I hope that he gets given another chance somewhere. But yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out. It's obviously a really big step. Again, a big stumbling block in his career once again. Maybe somewhere in the Netherlands. Louis van Gaal was able to rebuild his career. Maybe Erik Ten Hag can do it too.